Little poor girl never walked in her life until Jesus told her, "Stand up." "The nerve damage is permanent, Miss Thompson. I'm sorry, but there are no further treatments. Medically speaking, your daughter will never walk." Dr. Rodriguez delivered the verdict with clinical detachment, his eyes fixed on the chart rather than the small girl sitting quietly in her wheelchair, coloring a picture of angels with bright crayons. Sarah Thompson felt the words hit her chest like bullets. 7 years of hope. 7 years of surgeries, therapies, experimental treatments, and whispered prayers. All of it reduced to one sentence that shattered everything she had left to believe in. Lily looked up from her drawing, her 7-year-old eyes bright and curious. "What does that mean, Mummy?" Sarah's throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at her daughter's thin legs beneath the hospital blanket. Legs that had never taken a single step, never run through grass, never jumped or danced, or simply carried their owner across a room. "It means we go home now, baby," Sarah whispered finally. The bus ride back to their apartment was silent, except for the rumble of worn tires on cracked pavement. Sarah stared out the window at the grey October sky, while Lily folded her angel drawing into smaller and smaller squares until it disappeared in her tiny fist. They lived in Riverside Heights, a cluster of aging apartment buildings where rent was cheap and hope was cheaper. Sarah worked double shifts at Mel's Diner 6 days a week, serving coffee and eggs to truckers and factory workers who left dollar tips on $10 meals. Every penny went toward Lily's medical bills, leaving nothing for luxuries like new clothes or birthday parties or the kind of childhood Sarah had dreamed of giving her daughter. Their second-floor apartment overlooked the parking lot and the interstate beyond. Lily spent most of her days at the window, watching cars flash by and drawing pictures of the places she imagined they were going. Her bedroom walls were covered with these drawings, mountains and beaches, playgrounds and parks, always featuring children running and playing while she watched from the sidelines. That evening, Sarah heated a can of soup on the stove while Lily worked on a new drawing at the kitchen table. The silence stretched between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. A knock at the door broke the quiet. Sarah opened it to find Pastor John Martinez holding a covered casserole dish, his kind face creased with concern. "Sarah, I heard about the appointment today. I brought dinner." Sarah's face hardened. Pastor John had been visiting them for months, ever since one of the church ladies mentioned a single mother struggling with a disabled child. He meant well, but Sarah had no patience left for well-meaning people with easy answers. "Don't," she said, her voice flat and final. "Don't you dare come in here and talk to me about God's plan. I just heard from a doctor what God's plan is for my daughter. We're done." She closed the door in his face, leaning against it until she heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway. "Who was that, Mommy?" Lily called from the kitchen. "Nobody, baby. Just nobody." Over the following days, Sarah watched her daughter with growing desperation. Lily had always been a bright, hopeful child, filling their small apartment with chatter and laughter despite her limitations. But now something was dimming in her eyes. The drawings became darker, the angels losing their bright colors, their wings growing smaller and sadder. A week after the doctor's appointment, Sarah found a new picture on Lily's bedside table. It was an angel, like all the others, but this one's legs were scribbled out with angry grey crayon, violent marks that had torn through the paper in places. Sarah stared at the drawing until her vision blurred with tears. She was watching her daughter's spirit die, and she didn't know how to stop it. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in November. Rain hammered against the apartment windows, while lightning split the sky in jagged streaks. Lily had gone to bed early, exhausted from another day of watching the world through glass. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by medical bills and past due notices. The final report from Dr. Rodriguez lay open in front of her, its clinical language a monument to every hope that had ever been crushed. Next to it sat Lily's drawing of the broken-winged angel. Sarah picked up the picture, studying the violent grey marks that had obliterated the angel's legs. This was her daughter's future. Dreams scribbled out, hope erased, a life lived on the margins while everyone else ran free. The thunder crashed overhead, and something inside Sarah finally snapped. She slammed her fists on the table, sending bills scattering across the linoleum floor. Her voice rose to a scream that matched the storm outside. "And you win! Are you happy now?" She shouted at the ceiling, at the sky, at whatever cruel force had been orchestrating her life. "You took her legs, and now you're taking her joy. I have nothing left to give. Nothing!" Her voice cracked, but she wasn't finished. 7 years of anger poured out of her like poison from a wound. "If you are real, if you're up there listening, then prove it. Do something. Help her. Help me. I'm drowning here, and I can't save her, and I don't know what else to do." The words echoed in the small kitchen, swallowed by the storm. Sarah collapsed into her chair, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. She had prayed before, polite, careful prayers in hospital chapels and desperate whispers in the dark. But this wasn't prayer. This was surrender. Complete, broken, gut-wrenching surrender to a God she wasn't even sure existed anymore. In her bedroom down the hall, Lily's eyes fluttered open at the sound of her mother's cries. But as she lay in the darkness, something else captured her attention. The storm outside had suddenly stopped. The rain, the thunder, the wind, all of it ceased as if someone had turned off a switch. The silence was so complete it seemed to press against her eardrums. Then she was somewhere else. Lily stood. No, she was. Standing. In a garden unlike anything she had ever seen. Flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, their petals catching light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The grass beneath her feet was soft and cool, and for the first time in her life she could feel it between her toes. A man knelt before her wheelchair, which somehow sat empty beside a fountain of crystal water. He had kind eyes and gentle hands marked with old scars, and when he smiled, it felt like the sun breaking through clouds after the longest winter. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice warm and familiar, as if she had been waiting her whole life to hear it. "Tahin, are you Jesus?" she asked with the direct honesty of a child. "I am." He reached out and took her small hands in his larger ones. "Your mother's prayer has been heard." It was a good prayer, honest and real and full of love. Lily looked down at her legs, surprised to see them strong and steady beneath her nightgown. "But I can't walk." Jesus smiled again, and the garden seemed to bloom brighter around them. "Your mother believes you can't walk. The doctors believe you can't walk. But I believe you can." He stood, still holding her hands, and gently pulled her to her feet. Lily gasped as her legs supported her weight for the first time in her 7 years of life. "Now, little one," Jesus said, his voice carrying the authority of creation itself, "stand up." Lily's eyes snapped open in her own bedroom. The storm had passed, leaving only the gentle patter of light rain against the windows. Her mother's sobs had quieted to exhausted whimpers from the kitchen. But something was different. Something had changed. Lily felt warmth spreading through her legs like honey, like sunlight, like the touch of the man in the garden. She wiggled her toes beneath the blanket and felt them move, actually move. Without thinking, she swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her bare feet touched the cool wooden floor, and for the first time in her life, she felt the sensation of standing on solid ground. "Mommy?" she called softly. In the kitchen, Sarah lifted her head from her arms, thinking she had imagined her daughter's voice. But then she heard it again, closer this time, "Mummy, come see." Sarah turned towards the kitchen doorway and saw something that stopped her heart. Lily was standing there in her pink nightgown, her feet flat on the floor, her legs steady and sure. She wasn't leaning on anything, wasn't holding the wall for support. She was simply standing, as natural as breathing. "A man in a garden told me to get up," Lily said, her voice filled with wonder. "He said you prayed a good prayer." Sarah scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees, afraid that if she moved too quickly, the vision would disappear. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched Lily's calf, her ankle, her small, perfect feet planted firmly on the ground. It was real. Her daughter was standing. Sarah collapsed, wrapping her arms around Lily's legs, pressing her forehead against her knees. Her sobs were no longer of anger, but of gratitude so profound it threatened to tear her apart. "He heard me," she whispered into her daughter's nightgown. "Oh God, you heard me." Lily placed her small hands on her mother's head, stroking her hair the way Sarah had done for her during countless sleepless nights. "The man said to tell you that broken prayers are the best kind," Lily said, "because that's when people tell the truth." They stayed like that until dawn broke grey and quiet over Riverside Heights. Then, for the first time in 7 years, mother and daughter walked to the kitchen together. Sarah made pancakes while Lily took careful, experimental steps around the apartment. Each footfall was a miracle, each movement a gift that Sarah had never dared to believe possible. "We need to call the doctor," Sarah said, watching her daughter examine her own legs with scientific curiosity. "Can we go to church first?" Lily asked. "I want to say thank you." Sarah had avoided church for months, too angry at God to sit in a pew and pretend to worship. But looking at her daughter, her walking, healthy, whole daughter, she felt something shift in her chest. "Yes, baby, we can go to church." Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear, with November sunlight slanting through bare trees. Sarah dressed carefully in her one good dress, while Lily picked out clothes that she had never worn. Pants instead of skirts, shoes instead of slippers, an outfit chosen for walking instead of sitting. The walk to Riverside Community Church was 6 blocks that might as well have been 6 miles. Sarah had driven or taken the bus everywhere for 7 years, always thinking about wheelchair accessibility, always planning for Lily's limitations. Now they walked hand in hand down the sidewalk, while neighbors stopped their yard work to stare in shock. Mrs. Patterson dropped her rake. Old Mr. Cole pulled off his glasses and cleaned them twice. Children playing in their front yards fell silent, pointing at the little girl who had never been seen on her own 2 feet. "Is that the Thompson girl?" someone whispered. "How is she walking?" "What happened to her wheelchair?" Sarah ignored the voices and focused on the feeling of Lily's small hand in hers, the sound of their footsteps matching rhythm on the concrete. 7 years of carrying, lifting, pushing and accommodating had ended in a single night. Her daughter was free. Riverside Community Church sat on the corner of Oak and 3rd, a modest brick building with a white steeple that had weathered decades of storms. Pastor John's old sedan was parked in the gravel lot, and Sarah could see him through the office window, reviewing his sermon notes. They climbed the front steps together, Lily's first time navigating stairs on her own feet. Sarah's throat tightened as she watched her daughter carefully place one foot after the other, her face serious with concentration. The church doors opened just as they reached the top step. Pastor John emerged, probably heading to the sanctuary to prepare for the service. He saw them and stopped dead, his coffee mug freezing halfway to his lips. "Sarah. Lily." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Good morning, Pastor John," Lily said brightly. "Look what Jesus did." She let go of her mother's hand and took 3 careful steps toward him. Pastor John's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the concrete steps, but he didn't seem to notice. "How?" he breathed. "Prayer," Sarah said simply. The kind where you stop pretending and start telling the truth. Pastor John's eyes filled with tears as he knelt down to Lily's level. Can you tell me about it? Lily launched into a story about the garden and the man with kind eyes and scarred hands. Pastor John listened with the rapt attention of someone witnessing resurrection itself. He said Mummy's prayer was good because it was honest, Lily concluded, and he told me to stand up. By this time, other church members had begun arriving for the morning service. Word spread quickly through the parking lot, and soon a small crowd had gathered around the family on the front steps. Is it really her? Someone asked. The little girl in the wheelchair. How is this possible? Pastor John stood, wiping his eyes. Would you mind sharing your story with the congregation? I think they need to hear this. Sarah had never spoken in front of a group larger than her dining room table, but looking at the faces around her, some skeptical, some amazed, all hungry for something to believe in, she nodded. The sanctuary filled quickly as news of Lily's healing spread through the neighborhood. People called their friends, knocked on doors, sent urgent text messages. By the time the service began, every pew was packed, and people stood along the walls. Pastor John abandoned his prepared sermon and simply invited Sarah to the front of the church. She walked to the pulpit on unsteady legs, with Lily beside her, small and serious in her Sunday best. 7 years ago, Sarah began, her voice shaking, the doctors told me my daughter would never walk. Last week, they told me there was no hope left. No treatments, no surgeries, no chance that anything would ever change. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. I believed them. I accepted that this was our life, that Lily would always be different, always limited, always dependent. And I was angry. Angrier than I ever want to be again. She looked down at Lily, who smiled encouragingly. Last night, I stopped praying polite prayers and started screaming honest ones. I told God exactly what I thought of his plan for my daughter. I told him I was drowning and couldn't save her, and didn't know what else to do. Sarah's voice caught, but she pushed through. And while I was breaking apart in the kitchen, Jesus was visiting my daughter in a dream. He told her to stand up, and she did. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Sarah reached for Lily's hand. Show them, baby. Lily walked across the front of the sanctuary, her steps careful but confident. She had been walking for less than 2 days, but already her movements were becoming more natural. When she reached the far side, she turned and skipped back to her mother. The sanctuary erupted. Some people wept openly. Others stood and applauded. A few fell to their knees in prayer. Pastor John had to call for quiet 3 times before the congregation settled enough for him to speak. Sometimes, he said, his voice thick with emotion, God waits for us to be completely honest about our brokenness before he shows us how he can make us whole. After the service, the church families gathered in the fellowship hall for a potluck lunch that felt more like a celebration. Children surrounded Lily, fascinated by her story, and eager to play with someone who had been given such an extraordinary gift. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the kindness of people she had avoided for months. They brought food, shared their own stories of answered prayer, and welcomed her back into a community she had thought was lost forever. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had been praying for Lily since she was born, squeezed Sarah's hands with tears in her eyes. I never stopped believing, she said. Not once in 7 years. I did, Sarah admitted. I stopped believing in everything. But you didn't stop loving, Mrs. Henderson replied, and sometimes that's enough. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched Lily playing tag with the other children in the churchyard. Her daughter's laughter rang across the grass, bright and free and full of joy that had been missing for too long. Pastor John sat down beside her on the front steps. How are you processing all of this? Sarah considered the question. I keep expecting to wake up, or for her legs to stop working again. 7 years of limitations don't disappear overnight, you know. In my head, I mean. What does your heart tell you? Sarah watched Lily chase a boy named Tommy around the swing set, her legs pumping with newfound strength. My heart tells me that miracles are real, that prayer works, even when it sounds like screaming. That God hears us when we're honest, not just when we're polite. And what about your anger? The bitterness you've been carrying? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. It's gone. Not because I decided to let it go, but because there's no room for it anymore. When you're holding a miracle, you can't hold resentment at the same time. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play as the sun began to set behind the church steeple. "Pastor John," Sarah said eventually. "Yes? Thank you for not giving up on us, even when I slammed the door in your face." He smiled. I learned a long time ago that sometimes the angriest people are just the most hurt. And hurt people need the church more than anyone. That evening, Sarah called Dr. Rodriguez's office and left a message requesting an appointment. She knew they would need medical documentation of what had happened, though she doubted any doctor would be able to explain it. She also called her supervisor at the diner to let her know she might need to adjust her schedule. For 7 years, Sarah's entire life had revolved around Lily's limitations. Now she needed to figure out what life looked like when those limitations no longer existed. But first, she had something else to do. She found Lily in her bedroom, sitting at her small desk and working on a new drawing. This one showed a garden full of bright flowers and a man with kind eyes kneeling beside a little girl. The girl in the picture was standing on her own 2 feet, and angels danced in the sky above them. "It's beautiful, baby," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I want to remember what he looked like," Lily said, carefully coloring the man's eyes with a brown crayon. "In case I forget." "Do you think you might forget?" Lily considered this seriously. "I might forget what he looked like, but I don't think I'll ever forget what he said." "What did he say?" "That broken prayers are the best kind, because that's when people tell the truth. And that love is stronger than anything that's wrong with us." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "He said that?" "Uh-huh. And he said to tell you that he's been listening to all your prayers, even the angry ones. Especially the angry ones." That night, Sarah tucked Lily into bed and knelt beside her for evening prayers. The first time they had prayed together in months. "Thank you, God," Lily whispered, her eyes squeezed shut in concentration, "for fixing my legs and my mummy's heart." Sarah's throat tightened. "And thank you for not giving up on us, even when we gave up on you." They prayed for Pastor John and Mrs. Henderson and all the people at church who had celebrated with them. They prayed for Dr. Rodriguez and the nurses who had cared for Lily over the years. They even prayed for other families facing impossible diagnoses, that they might find hope in the midst of their struggles. When Lily's breathing deepened into sleep, Sarah remained kneeling beside the bed, watching her daughter's face in the dim light from the hallway. 7 years of worry lines had been erased from that small forehead. 7 years of pain had been replaced by peace. "Thank you," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for hearing my broken prayer. Thank you for loving us enough to wait for us to be ready for a miracle." The next morning brought a new reality that Sarah was still learning to navigate. Lily woke up early, eager to test her legs again. She walked to the kitchen for breakfast, her steps more confident than the day before. "Can we walk to the park today?" she asked over her cereal. Sarah's first instinct was to list all the reasons why that wasn't possible. The distance, the crowds, the lack of accessible facilities. Then she remembered that those limitations no longer applied. "Yes," she said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "We can walk to the park." They spent the morning at Riverside Park, where Lily experienced grass between her toes for the first time. climbed her first playground equipment, and went down her first slide. Other parents stared in amazement as the little girl they had only ever seen in a wheelchair ran and played like any other child. In the afternoon, they visited Dr. Rodriguez's office for emergency testing. The doctor's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, confusion, wonder, and finally professional acceptance of something that had no medical explanation. "Her legs are completely normal," he told Sarah after an hour of examinations. "Muscle tone, reflexes, bone density. Everything is exactly what it should be in a healthy 7-year-old. It's as if the original damage never existed." "How is that possible?" Dr. Rodriguez removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "In 30 years of practice, I've learned that medicine has its limitations. We can describe what happened to your daughter, but we can't explain it. Some things exist beyond our understanding." He handed Sarah a folder containing Lily's test results. "Keep these. You'll probably need them for school records and insurance purposes. But more than that, keep them as a reminder that miracles are real." That evening, Sarah called her mother in Arizona. The first conversation they'd had in months. Her mother wept when she heard the news, then immediately began making plans to visit. "I always knew God had something special planned for that little girl," her mother said through her tears. "I just didn't know it would be this." Word of Lily's healing continued to spread throughout Riverside Heights and beyond. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. A television reporter asked for an interview. Pastor John received calls from other churches wanting to hear their testimony. But through it all, Sarah and Lily tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. Lily returned to school, where her teachers and classmates struggled to process the transformation. She would need physical therapy to build her strength and coordination, but the foundation was there. Strong, healthy legs that had been made new. Sarah reduced her hours at the diner, using her savings to take some time off and help Lily adjust to her new life. For the first time in 7 years, she wasn't racing between work and medical appointments, wasn't fighting insurance companies or researching treatments. 3 weeks after the miracle, Sarah sat in the same pew where she had given her testimony, listening to Pastor John preach about the power of honest prayer. Lily was in Sunday school, probably telling her story to a new group of wide-eyed children. After the service, a young mother approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. She was holding a toddler with leg braces, and Sarah recognized the look of desperate hope mixed with crushing fear. "My son has cerebral palsy," the woman said quietly. "The doctors say he'll probably never walk without assistance. I heard about your daughter, and I was wondering, could you pray for us?" Sarah felt a flutter of uncertainty. She wasn't a faith healer or a miracle worker. She was just a mother who had screamed at God in her kitchen and somehow been heard. But then she remembered something Lily had told her about the man in the garden, that broken prayers were the best kind because they were honest. "I can pray with you," Sarah said, taking the woman's hand. "But I think the most important thing is to tell God exactly what's in your heart, even if it's anger or fear or doubt. He can handle our honesty better than our politeness." They prayed together right there in the sanctuary. 2 mothers united by love for their children and hope for the impossible. Sarah didn't know if this woman's son would be healed, but she knew that God was listening to their honest hearts. Later that afternoon, Sarah and Lily walked through their neighborhood, a route that had once required careful planning and wheelchair accessibility. Now it was simply a pleasant stroll between a mother and daughter who had been given a second chance at everything. "Mummy," Lily said, as they paused at the corner where the bus stop used to be their only option for longer trips. "Do you think other kids will get better too?" "I don't know, baby. Miracles are mysterious things. But I know that God loves all children, and He hears all prayers, especially the honest ones." "Should we pray for them?" "Every day," Sarah said, squeezing her daughter's hand. every single day. That night, as Sarah tucked Lily into bed, she found a new drawing on the nightstand. This one showed their apartment building with the window Lily used to watch from, but instead of a child looking out, the window was empty. Below the building, stick figures of all sizes were walking and running and playing together. "And that's our new life," Lily explained. "No more watching from windows." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead and turned off the light. In the darkness, she whispered a prayer of gratitude, not polite or formal, but raw and honest and full of wonder. "Thank you for teaching me that broken prayers reach heaven faster than perfect ones. Thank you for my daughter's legs and my own faith. Thank you for waiting for us to be ready for a miracle." Outside, Riverside Heights settled into evening quiet. In apartment buildings and houses throughout the neighborhood, mothers tucked their children into bed and whispered their own prayers, some desperate, some grateful, all honest in their own way. And somewhere beyond the city lights, in a place where gardens bloom with impossible colors and love heals all wounds, the prayer of every broken heart was heard and treasured by the one who told a little girl to stand up, not because her legs were healed, but because love had always been stronger than anything that was wrong with her. The miracle of Lily Thompson's walking legs became legend in Riverside Heights, but those who knew the family understood that the greater miracle was the healing of her mother's heart, the transformation from bitter anger to honest faith, from desperate control to surrendered trust. Years later, when Lily was a teenager running track at the local high school, people would still stop Sarah on the street to ask about that November night when everything changed. Sarah's answer was always the same. God doesn't need our perfect prayers. He just needs our honest hearts. And sometimes, when we finally stop pretending and start telling the truth, He shows us what miracles really look like. In a box in Lily's closet, carefully preserved between sheets of tissue paper, was the drawing of the broken winged angel that had once represented a mother's despair. Beside it was the new drawing of the garden, where a little girl had been told to stand up, a reminder that even the most shattered dreams could be restored by a love bigger than human understanding. The wheelchair gathered dust in the storage unit, kept not as a reminder of limitation, but as a testimony to transformation. And every November, on the anniversary of the night Jesus told a little girl to stand up, the Thompson family returned to Riverside Community Church to give thanks for the miracle that began with a mother's broken prayer and ended with a daughter's steady steps toward a future full of infinite possibility.